Alright, this video is brought to you by our new website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please consider logging onto our site, create an account, and submit your firearms for an offer request. Now, with those offers, you will get a printable offer certificate, which you can take with you to competing gun stores in your area to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell them to us. We do provide you with the shipping label, and we will pay you with an ACH direct deposit or a paper check, whichever one you choose, to make the process as easy and seamless for you as possible. So please remember, go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Alright guys, remember the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses. Starting us off with our first spot is a firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Michigan. Now, this is a Glock, obviously, but this is one variant that is not too often seen and probably one of the least common Glock variants out there on the market. This is a Model 17L. It is a long slide, which is what the L designation is for on the Glock 17 frame, having a 17-round magazine. Now, the original Glock 17 would hit the market as Glock's first introduction into the handgun line in about 1982, development beginning around 1980. In 1988, they would release this, a long slide variant of the popular, and then one of the only products on their lines was the competition variation of the Glock 17. You have a much longer barrel and a long slide with this lightning cut into the top, adjustable sights, and extended magazine release, and this was of course intended for the competition market. Now, this was a very, very popular option. They did have one eventually in .40 caliber known as the Model 24. And these were basically the go-to competition firearm. If you've never shot one of these things, it's virtually impossible to miss with it. Of course, you have such that long sight radius, long barrel for that added velocity. They're just a joy to shoot, very light recoil, very low muzzle flip. But as a lot of people were getting into them, it was found that they were not really fair for a stock pistol competition circuits. So they incorporated what you tend to see in competitions today as a box that you have to fit the firearm into to make sure that the overall contours, grip size, barrel length, and things like that are not over a standard size. And typically those boxes are modeled on the 1911 government size. And unfortunately, since then, the Glock 17 would not fit into that. So they would come out with the 34 and 35 model. The 9mm is the 34, the .40 caliber is the 35, which would fit into those requirements. And those have really become the standard competition models. Now, because of that, because it doesn't really serve a really tactical application, it's a little bit big, you can't really use it for concealed carry, at least in most cases. There is no competition aspect for it anymore, as they're not allowed in a lot of competition circuits, and they've then been replaced by the 34 and 35. There hasn't really become much of a use for these other than just really fun range plinkers, and because of that, Glock they haven't really discontinued the model, but they do not manufacture them much anymore. And they do put out about every couple years, they will do a short production run. So you do see them pop up on the market new every few years. And new, you tend to find them around the $800 mark when they're actually in production, and it will drive the price down a little bit on the used ones. So these do carry a little bit of a roller coaster in terms of value. They're in production, then they're out of production, then they're in production, they're out of production. Currently, they're out of production. So you tend to see the pricing on these come up a little bit. This is generation 3, and you tend to see them in really good condition between $1,000 and $1,200 or so. This one has its original box, one aftermarket magazine, and a bunch of holster wear on the side. So, you know, something like this, maybe around the $800 mark, maybe a little bit higher. But they do make really, really fun range guns if you've never picked one up, and there's always people looking out for a 17L. So if you ever do see one, definitely try and take the opportunity to pick one up, put some rounds through it if you can. You're just kind of be amazed with how accurate these things can be. Okay, up next we have a pretty interesting revolver from Smith & Wesson, and this one comes to us from a viewer who lives a couple hours south of us who used the website and sent this to us. So thank you so much for selling this to us. This is a Smith & Wesson Governor. This is a pretty different animal. This has a 2 3/4 inch barrel, really nice blued finish. It is built on Smith & Wesson's Z frame, which is basically an elongated end frame, elongated to accommodate that longer cylinder. This does use a .410 shotgun shell or can fire 45 Colt or 45 ACP, double single action revolver. Now, the story with this would actually begin with its closest competitor, the Taurus Judge, which it itself hit the market in 2008. Now, there was a lot of speculation as to where on the market that type of product would land, a .410 shotgun shell in a revolver. Is it going to be a range novelty? Where is it going to see success, or is it not going to see success at all? And that's kind of what Smith & Wesson was watching for. Now, the Taurus Judge, actually here now 14 years later, has been a huge commercial success. They have sold tons of them. They have expanded upon the line, creating a rifle variant known as the Circuit Judge. They have the Defender series, different barrel lengths, different finishes. It has been a huge splash on the market. So a few years after its inception, Smith & Wesson would come out with a variation of their own known as the Governor. Now, there were a couple upgrades from this that you could expect over the Taurus Judge. The Taurus Judge was a 5-round capacity. This was a 6. The Taurus Judge was a 45 Colt or 410 shotgun shell, but the Governor incorporated the use of a cylinder cuts in here, allowing you to use moon clips. So you could fire the non-rimmed 45 ACP, giving you a cheaper and less recoil-intensive caliber or ammunition type option that you could use in this for target practicing or defense or whatever you wanted to use it for, trying to expand upon its application possibilities. Now, I will say the Governor was not as much of a commercial success as the Judge. I don't think that they probably did not take a whole lot of market share from the Judge. The Judge, I mean, being somebody who's owned a gun store now for about 8 years, we have sold just a handful of these, pretty much all used ones that we get in. We get them from time to time, but we sell tons and tons of Judges. Now the Judge now, I mean, if we talk going back a few years, they were about $400 to $450 new. I'm seeing them now between about $500 and $550 new. You typically find them $400 to $450 used. These guys are about $1,000, maybe a little less, $900 to $1,000 new, at about $800 used. So either way you splice it, you are twice the price in the Governor than you are in the Judge. Now, when it comes to other revolvers, if we're talking a Taurus 85 versus a Smith & Wesson, you know, 442, I personally prefer the Smith & Wesson. I see a lot more value in the extra $100 or $200. When it comes to the Judge is a really well-built, really robust firearm. Would I personally double the price tag to get into the Smith option? Me, personally not, mainly because if I got a 410 revolver, it's going to be, you know, something to throw in the glove box or throw in a backpack if I go hiking or something like that. It's not something I'm going to really be paying a bunch of attention to the aesthetic on, which I think Smith & Wesson has done. Now, again, you do have nicer sights, you have one extra round in the cylinder, you do have those cuts for that moon clips, but would that justify to me spending an extra $400 for those features? Me, personally not, but to each their own, and you know, that's up to you as the consumer to decide. But those are the general feature differences, and you do get the Smith & Wesson name over the Taurus as well, which a lot of people put weight into, and I do put some weight into that as well. I do like Smith as a brand more than Taurus. And most options, but this is not one of them. But I do think that this is an awesome firearm. It's very unique, very interesting. But anyway, I've rambled on enough about that, but that is the Smith & Wesson Governor. Okay, up next is a very unique and innovative, for its time, pistol that comes to us from a viewer in New Mexico. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is the Thompson Center Encore, which is a top break single shot. This one is chambered in 22-250. It does have convertible, you know, you can get a rifle carbine with longer barrel length conversions. You can get caliber conversions for different barrels and things like that. Now, this would get its start in the early 1960s with a gentleman of the name of Warren Center, who was interested in coming up with the ultimate sporting enthusiast silhouette target or hunting firearm that can do the things I just mentioned. It can go between different calibers, it can go between different configurations with the stock or the longer barrels and things like that, all laws being followed, of course. Now, in the early 1960s, he would actually get to work prototyping this type of concept in his own garage, on his own tooling, and on his own dime. By 1965, he had come up with a prototype, but he needed some way of mass production and mass marketing of his new design. Now, he would show this design to the K.W. Thompson Trading Company, who was actually interested in taking on the product with him. And by about 1967, they had the Thompson Center Contender, which is just like the Encore, but it does use a different trigger mechanism, and it does have a lower, I should say, a lighter and slimmer profile to the frame, meant for lower powered cartridges. You know, rim fires and things like that, up to 30 carbine. Really, the caliber options for these things are endless. Like in the Encore alone, there's 60 different caliber variations that you can get. I digress. Getting back into this. By about 1967, the Contender was ready for the market. Shortly after that, they would actually incorporate as Thompson Center, and they would come out with this, you know, very popular silhouette and hunting pistol setup. You could also get as a carbine with all these endless different calibers. You could buy one firearm and get 10 different barrels and use it for, you know, 22 Hornet and 30 carbine and 30-30, and then later the 44 Magnum and things like that. Now, following the success of the Contender, in 1983, they would come out with this, the Encore. Now, they made a couple changes. They improved, or I shouldn't say improved, but they did change the trigger mechanism, which actually does change the grip angle a little bit. And they drastically beefed up the receiver so that this can handle higher pressure cartridges. Like this one's in 22-250. So this is more of the rifle or big game, if you will, configuration of the Contender. Now, shortly after the release of the Encore, they did release a second generation of the Contender, again meant for for the lower pressure cartridges, but did use a lot of the benefits of the Encore, including the trigger mechanism design. Again, between the two, between the Contender and the Encore, there's over, I believe, 60 to 80 different caliber variations you can get. So, I mean, it's just very expansive, the things that you can do with these, and they are still very, very, very popular today. Now, on the market today, the pricing is a little bit weird because a lot of these come as sets with a lot of different parts. Again, you can get the wood, you can get the sort of rubberized, you can get the rifle carbine configurations, you can get them engraved. But if we're just talking base, something standalone with just one barrel, the Encore tends to start around 700, 750. But once you start adding all those barrels into it, you know, they can go way up from there. The Contenders tend to be a little bit less. Tend to see the Contenders starting at about $500 or $600 or so, and then going up from there depending on the different barrels and things that they come with. But anyway, a very interesting concept and design. I always enjoy getting the Contenders and the Encores in, so happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. Okay, up next I have a pretty interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer, so thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is an FN model 1910. This one is a 32 automatic, although they did also make them in 380 as well, feeding from a detachable single stack magazine. Now, this was the brainchild of John Moses Browning, who we know had always taken his firearm designs to both Colt and FN in Belgium to try and solicit their adoption into production of these designs. Now, Colt had already seen a lot of commercial success with the 1903 and 1908 pocket hammerless pistols. Didn't really have a need for another concealed carry type of firearm, but FN in Belgium definitely wanted to take this on, and they did, and they released it in 1910 as the Model 1910. Again, chambered in 32 and 380. Now remember, around this time, concealed carry was starting to become very popular. 9mm was a very nascent round at the time, being developed around this time over in Germany with the Luger pistol. So things like the 25 automatic, the 32 automatic, and the 380 were really the concealed carry options of the day. So things like this were very popular to purchase and own, and was what, you know, sort of like the Glock 43 or the Shield of, you know, the early 1900s. It's typically things like this. Now, the Model 1910 is actually a very infamous firearm insofar as it was actually sort of the impetus, I should say, it was used in what became the impetus for the sort of the powder keg explosion leading into the First World War. Now, we talked about this story before when we looked at the 1922, but I'll gloss over it again. So back in about 1914, we have Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand visit Sarajevo. Now, Serbia at the time, there were a lot of nationalist groups who wanted to sort of annex themselves and become very independent. And there were a couple socialist organizations. There was Young Bosnia, there was the Black Hand, and they both had a joint interest in Archduke Franz Ferdinand not receiving power in Austria, as they would see that counterintuitive to their mission of, you know, sort of isolating themselves, or their independence, I should say. Now, he had planned to visit Sarajevo. There was a group of 6 so-called assassins who would be assembled to try and kill the Archduke upon his visit. There was an early attempt involving a hand grenade when his motorcade was going down the street to a conference. That failed. It did injure but did not kill members of his motorcade. Later on that day, he had decided, that's Archduke Franz Ferdinand, had decided that he wanted to go and visit at the hospital those who had been hurt. It was a secret route had been derived, but the driver of his vehicle had not been given that route, so he followed on to his normal course, which put him through a very busy and congested street, which the assassins knew he would be on, at least from their original plan. They would end up on the street. The car would actually stall. There's no indication the driver was involved at all. And then Gavrilo Princip of the Black Hand and Young Bosnia would approach the vehicle holding a 1910, his chambered in 380, and would kill both Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, thus accomplishing their mission. Shortly after that, you would have the July crisis, and that would lead into the Austria-Hungary war being declared by them on Serbia, which would be the impetus for all of World War I to start. So you can sort of attribute it to this design plus the misgivings of the gentleman who used it to assassinate a leader. So very interesting history there, and anytime I pick one of these up, you kind of remember the importance of that happening. But anyway, there is that, a model 1910. If you look on the market today, the pricing all over the place. This one's in pretty poor condition, so I would say $200 to $300. Really good condition ones, typically between $5 and $7. So there you go. Okay, up next is a very popular rifle that I am very fond of. This is a Czechoslovakian VZ52, and this one comes to us from a local customer. This is chambered in 7.62 by 45. Does feed from a detachable 10-round box magazine. It is a short stroke gas piston with an integral bayonet, and it does have a tilt-to-lock bolt. A story with this, if we look back at the World War II era, Czechoslovakia had been manufacturing, mainly for German occupation or German usage, the bolt-action rifles. Post-World War II, they were looking at getting into their very first self-loading rifle, and they were, of course, had a lot of influence from the USSR. There was the Eastern Bloc countries, and Russia in and of themselves were coming up with new technology. In the latter years, or I should say in the last year, 1945, of World War II, they had been developing and actually producing the SKS rifle. Now, that only saw limited service in Russia for just a couple years before it would be replaced by the AK-47, but it definitely left its impression on the rest of Europe. Similar countries would come out with things. You would have, China would adopt the SKS. You would have the Albanian variation of the SKS. Czechoslovakia would come out with this. You would have the Rashid in Egypt. Romania would adopt the SKS. Yugoslavia would adopt the SKS. So there was wide-scale adoption of this principle, the self-loading semi-automatic rifle using an intermediate cartridge. Now, when it came to arms development in Czechoslovakia, there was a very strong belief that they should have control over their domestic arms production. They should come up with their own designs that are not licensed or contract with anybody else. They are made in-house in the country with their own, in this case, proprietary cartridge, the 7.62 by 45. So in any type of conflict, no matter whom it's with, they have access to armaments. Now, Russia, with the Eastern Bloc countries, really did not have so much of an issue with that, but what they did want was commonality of cartridge. So in the 1950s, of course, 1952, Czechoslovakia would come out with this design in the 7.62 by 45, like the 39 with a longer casing, kind of a weird round and kind of hard to find today. That was okay through the 1950s, but there was extreme pressure coming from Russia to move into the 7.62 by 39 cartridge, which they did in 1957. They came up with a revamped version of this known as the 5257. I've had one of those on this channel before. I did a video with 2A about 6 months ago when he brought his, and we showcased that. So if you want to see a 5257, please go check out that video. Now, those would only stay in production for 1 year until they were finally replaced by the VZ58, which was Czechoslovakia's first assault rifle. What I mean by that is shoulder-fired, intermediate cartridge, and select fire. So you have your first fully automatic assault rifle, if you will. I know some people get touchy with that word, but that's the true usage of the word. It looks similar to an AK or an AKM, but there's really not a lot of similarities to it in terms of function. It's got a similar aesthetic, I guess, no parts interchangeability, but that's when they would then retire this rifle in production of those. So did see a distinguished military service in Czechoslovakia for about 6 or so years, but still very interesting staple in the surplus market. Now let's talk about pricing. The two variations. First, let's talk about 7.62 by 45. If you're in fair to decent condition, a shooter, you might be 300 to 500. Good plus conditions, 500 to 700, and an excellent, really good, unissued light condition, over 1,000. Now, where you go up really high in prices in the 7.62 by 39 variant. Not only are they rare, they were only made for about a year, but also they are in a cartridge that's easy to obtain here if you want one to shoot. Those typically start at around $1,000 and go up from there. So, really interesting rifles. Again, not a very steeped military history on these, but they are very unique in their design. Very kind of eye-catching when you see one. So definitely worth taking a look at. And they're gentle shooters. Pretty flat shooting on the 7.62 by 45. But anyway, there is that for you, a VZ52. Okay, up next is a very interesting rifle that comes to us from a viewer in Florida. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is the Sig 556 XIR R4 Russian. obviously chambered in 7.62 by 39 using standard AK magazines. Now, the story with this would begin in the 70s to the 80s with the development of what would turn into the Swiss SG550 series, or what they adopted in their military service as the STGW90 in 1990. I'll roll in a picture so you guys can see what that looks like. The standard rifle length version was the 550, the carbine was the 551. Now, from the STGW90, there became a civilian version called the PE90. It was identical to their military configuration, except it was not select fire, so semi-automatic only. Now, the intended purpose of that was target shooting, sports use, competition rifle for Swiss civilians. Of course, Switzerland has always had, at least as close as you can get to a similarity in an American culture of firearm ownership. It was always encouraged for the citizenry in Switzerland, especially the ex-military, to have possession of the 550 series of rifles, or the military rifle for domestic defense, if you will. And there's a certain level of expectation for continued training and marksmanship qualification with those rifles. So interesting firearm culture there, but the PE90 was a direct result of that culture. So you had the non-military civilian version of the 550 rifle. Now, somehow, and the jury's kind of out on how this happened, several of the PE90s actually ended up here in the United States on the commercial market. It is estimated that probably less than 50 are known to exist here locally, and therefore the price on them is insanely high. But it is as close as you can get to the military, you know, the 550 series or the STGW90. It is an identical rifle, other than the fire control group being, you know, not being select fire. Now, there was an actual SIG import that was actually slated for importation into the United States, and that was the SIG 550 rifle, known as the pre-ban 550, coming in before the 1994 assault weapons ban and the importation issues of 1989. Both of those are conflated into what caused their importation issues, but those also were not brought into the country very long. Now, it was like the PE90, except for there was a couple modifications to even hone back even further the military features. The bayonet lug was deleted, and modifications were made to the front muzzle brake and the grenade ring so that it could not be adapted to fire grenades. So you go through the 1990s and the 2000s, and there is a growing need. There is a domestic want for a SIG 550 series of rifle here domestically. Now, Sig Sauer domestically in 2006 answered the call by developing the SIG 556 rifle. That was going to be the commercially, domestically manufactured 550 series. It was offered in 556 and 7.62 by 39 primarily, and the 7.62 by 39 variant was known as the 556R, R for Russian. Now, those were plagued with issues. You can go watch Mac at Military Arms Channel videos he did 8 or 9 years ago where his were jamming left and right. He actually got 2 of them. That was a consistent story with everybody who owned them. Now, the 556 version in 556, from 2006 onward, they made many different versions. The Classic, which was meant to really look like the 551. They made the SWAT version with the quad rail. And those in the 556 chambering were very, very good rifles. Now, at SHOT Show of 2014, SIG would release this, the SIG 556XI, both in 556 300 blackout and 7.62 by 39 again. Now, the principle of this was complete modularity. It was so that you could actually pop out the charging handle and put it on the other side, both good for left or right-handed shooters. This entire mechanism is actually not serialized. The serialized part is right up here on the upper receiver, so if you wanted to put in a 556 magwell adapter in here, or the 556 lower, I should say, you could do that for standard Stanag magazines. If you had the 556 caliber, you could get the 7.62 by 39 Russian magazine, lower assembly, and put that on the rifle. It is the barrel changes can be done. Everything on the rifle is totally modular, so you can buy a whole bunch of different parts and switch between different calibers. This was actually quite an improvement over the standard 556. Both in 556, 7.62 by 39, and the 300 blackout, this was known as a reliable rifle. They worked out a lot of the quirks and the kinks and fixed a lot of the issues that they were experiencing. And this was actually a successful product, and you could pick it up on the market around $1,400 or $1,500. Now, unfortunately, a few years later, just a couple years later, 2016, Sig released the MCX, and the sales of that were really, really good. They've since come out with several different variations of the MCX. They totally cannibalized the sale of the 556 XI series, so Sig would discontinue it. So the XIs actually only saw production for about 2 to 3 years, making them not so common on the market. Now, if we're looking at the pricing of these on the market today, used without the box, or I mean, depending on what they come with, you typically find them between like $1,400 to $1,700. With the box and everything, they're going to be towards the higher end of that. So really interesting rifle in the low to mid-teens in terms of value. So if you're interested in one, definitely pick one up. But because they don't make them anymore, they are sure to increase in value as time goes on. So anyway, very interesting rifle. I always like the Sig 550 inspired, or parts of the 550 line. Really interesting history on that rifle. Really glad to get this one and share it with you guys. Okay, up next is a very cool pistol that comes to us from a viewer in New Hampshire. So thank you so much for sending this one to us. This is an HK Mark 23. It feeds from a detachable double stack magazine, 45 ACP. It is double single action with a decocker here on the left-hand side, as well as a separate manual safety as well. Firing from double single action. It does have a threaded barrel and medium profile sights, and a paddle magazine release. Now, as you can see, the basic sort of stature of this firearm is very large, especially for a 12-round capacity 45 ACP. Pretty weighted too, so you can only imagine that this has a very, very minimal recoil impulse on a 45, and they actually are known for being very accurate. This is actually a pretty old design, coming about in the early 90s. Now, if we go back a couple years to 1989, the United States SOCOM had decided that they wanted a new handgun system. Okay, they wanted something that could be used tactically in an offensive role and could actually serve as a primary weapon system, the primary combat weapon should any member of the SOCOM team be relegated to having to use their sidearm. Could it be enough firepower to get them out of a bad situation? In 1991, the United States military would actually put out an official solicitation naming the program the OHWS, standing for Offensive Handgun Weapon System, as the application would suggest. Now, HK would enter this competition with the Mark 23. The whole system would actually incorporate a laser sighting system, or just a laser that would mount right here under the barrel, very large, boxy, early 1990s technology, and a suppressor, as well as 2 magazines, standard capacity at 12 rounds. Now, through pop culture, you guys know the Metal Gear Solid franchise from PlayStation. If you're into that, that's Solid Snake. Typically, that's how you see it loaded out. But anytime you see these used in pop culture movies or anything like that, you typically see the big boxy laser unit underneath with a big suppressor attached to it. But that entire kit was how it would have been issued, and they did win that firearm, that handgun weapons program in 1991. Now, going along with this, with the military success and application of the firearm, its use in pop culture, HK decided that they would come out with a civilian version for the consumer market, which is really the identical pistol, except it only had a 10-round capacity, having been released in 1996 in the middle of the assault weapons ban. Really the only functional difference between the two. In fact, the early ones for the first 2 or 3 years of production actually came out in a camouflage style zipper, semi-padded case with provisions for the sighting system and the suppressor with it. So you had the whole kit. If you wanted the whole kit, even your carrying case could accommodate all of that, just like SOCOM. So pretty cool, and that was the idea. They met immediate success in the consumer market, especially just because of the new age tactical looks, feel, and style, as well as the really good rigidity, the ruggedness, the weight, the recoil impulse, for the time, the capacity, and 45 ACP, and the accuracy. So these, even today, are enjoyed by a lot of HK collectors and shooters. Now, in 2010, these would actually be discontinued from production, having seen 16 years of production, and the prices, of course, would explode. So you would see them going, $2,500 to $3,500 plus in often cases. So collectors really wanted these for their collections, especially if you had the whole kit with it. Now, in about 2018, they would re-release it to the market. So this is actually one of the newer ones with the modern HK foam padded boxes, with a retail price brand new of about $2,000 to $2,200 depending on where you find it. And today these can be found used on the market in the mid to high teens, so like $1,500 to $1,800 depending on condition and what it comes with. Some of them getting up to about $2,000. If you have the early ones with the, again, the original padded camo case, the 1996 to about 1999 era, those could top up in the high $2,000s. But most of them you typically see in the high teens or so. So anyway, really interesting pistol. I always love seeing a Mark 23. Just a lot of interesting history here from the early 1990s. Okay, last but not least, we have a very interesting firearm that comes to us from a viewer in South Carolina. So thank you so much for selling this to us. This is the FN-FS2000 semi-automatic version of the F2000, excuse me, which was a fully automatic military combat assault rifle, if you will. Now this has a very unconventional appearance to it, what is called by many as the pregnant or the tactical tuna. Has somewhat of an egg type shape to it, and it is in a bullpup configuration with the chamber and the magazine being behind the trigger group. Now this does use a 30 round detachable Stanag M16 style magazine. It will not accept the polymer mags like Magpul and Lancer and stuff like that, which is one of the many problems that this was plagued with on the market. And we'll talk about those as we go through this. So for those of you who know FN is Fabrique Nationale, based in Belgium, and they have a very steeped history of coming out with very innovative, not only commercial firearms, but military firearms. Now in the 1990s, there's somewhat of an arms revolution going on. This is when a lot of countries are moving from their Cold War era. Remember, Cold War ended in 1989, so especially the Com Bloc countries are moving away from what was used during the Cold War, things like M16s and SETME-Ls and AKMs, AK-47s, AK-74s, moving into a more revamped, modernized military rifle. Now, FN wanting to capitalize on this, again, maintaining with the traditions of their very good and superior design techniques and implementation for military-type firearms, wanted to come out with the universal, end-all, be-all, do-everything rifle that would serve in many different applications, whether for military or police use, lethal or less than lethal applications, and this was going to be the one that was going to do it. Now, by about 1995 to 1998, the production of this had been in full swing. By about 2000, the model had been produced, given the name the F2000, and by 2001, it was released to the world, and it was Abu Dhabi, I believe, at the military trade convention, and it was released for the consumption of the world market. Now, unfortunately, much to the chagrin of FN, it took off like a lead balloon. Now, it did get a lot of military contracts. It did serve in Slovenia, Belgium, India, Libya, Pakistan, Croatia, and Poland, to name a few. There were a couple others, other adopters of this as well. Mainly used in support and specialty roles, serving with like special force units and things like that, but was never really adopted as a main standard infantry rifle from anybody. So again, adopted in very small numbers by a few smaller countries. So again, did not see a huge amount of military success, and it is still used in limited use around the world today, but again, not seeing much use. Now in 2006, FN would pivot to the US commercial market, releasing the FS2000, which is what we have here. Identical to the military configuration, except it was of course not select fire, semi-automatic only. The barrel was a little longer with a pinned muzzle brake, giving it the essential 16-inch capacity. The original military ones are quite a bit shorter. They deleted the bayonet lug, and those were basically the modifications. You could get this with an integral optic, very large optic up here at the top, which is actually not the best quality optic. And you had a very rounded handguard, which could be removed, and a rail could be put in its place, which was what was done here. So with that giant optic and that handguard, this has a very like circular type of look to it, a very futuristic alien type looking thing. So a lot of the problems that this was plagued with, as I first mentioned, you could not take the standard Stanag, the Magpul magazines or anything like that. Also, the magazine fit is very, very tight, as there are gaskets in here to give it a very tight seal when the magazine is inserted, so no trash or debris can actually get into the mag well. Keeping it very, and this is actually a very sealed up design. Access to the chamber is through this door back here on top of the action. Open that up and you can clear the chamber. You do have sort of a nice, very small and sealed up I guess you'd say charging handle port with a little dust cover up here at the front. It's kind of integral into the charging handle. So a very, very sealed up package. Your spent casings actually are fed through a chute and eject out the front of the rifle, so you don't have to worry about left or right-handed operation. It is user-friendly for both. So actually a lot of innovative designs on here, but also a lot of hindrances. Because of those tight tolerances and things like that, it did slow down the ease of operation and of course limited the type of magazines and things that could be used in this. On the US commercial market, they did okay. They were pretty expensive at between about $1,500 and $2,000 for retail. Not a whole lot of these sold, and they didn't really start gaining a lot of appreciation until they left the market in about 2017, 2018. These would be discontinued from sale from FN. And actually, the military configuration as well, the F2000, has been completely removed from their catalog as well. So it is now no longer a manufactured rifle, both for military or civilian application, leaving it as somewhat of a collectible and a novelty now. On the consumer market today, you're finding them used anywhere from the low twos to the high twos, $2,300 to $2,600, $2,700 or so, depending on what they come with. They did sell these in an OD green configuration, which tends to sell a little bit higher than the black ones. Also, if you have the integrated optic, that's going to be towards the higher end of that range as well, if you have the original box and packaging. So anyway, something like this, sort of in the low to mid twos, if you will. So anyway, very interesting firearm. Happy to get this in and share it with you guys and end it on that. The very unique and interesting FS2000 from FN. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please remember to hit that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when I am posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.